Hi everyone and welcome. This is Mindy Eggen for Scrapbook and Cards Today magazine, and today I have some color inspiration to share with you using the Let's Stamp Together kit featuring Spellbinders. In case you haven't jumped into your kit yet, we're going to just quickly walk through what was included in your kit, starting with the dies that are on this magnet sheet. Then we also have a stencil, which I will be using today. You can create this beautiful design on the front of your card or the image in the center, which is for a floral design. And then we also have that beautiful stamp set with sentiments and then your card telling you what's all in your kit. So before I actually started filming, I came up with this card design that was inspired by Kim Kestey's floral arrangement. And I really wanted to focus on color inspiration using this kit. I love Kim's designs. I think she came up with some beautiful ways to arrange the bouquet. So I'm going to do that, but pull in my own colors. Now I'm going to step up my card just a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is stencil on the design. I will be using Cosmic Sky cardstock from Spellbinders, and I will be working on a magnetic work surface. So I have my stencil held down with my magnets, and I'm using some Post-it tape to just kind of mask off the inner part of the stencil. Now, what I really want to do is kind of have a tone-on-tone look, but when I'm going for that, I like to choose an ink that's just a little bit darker than my cardstock. In this case, I found that Midnight ink from Concord and Ninth would be a great match. So I'm going to apply that ink color all over the open areas of the stencil using my blending brush. So I'm just going to make sure I'm going back and forth to cover all the edges of the stencil and all the way down and around. So it's going to leave the center portion open, free of any ink. And then when I remove my stencil, I have this gorgeous tone-on-tone look. It's very regal, I think. I also wanted to include how I clean up my stencil and workspace. So here I'm just spraying down some rubbing alcohol and wiping that away with a towel. And then I'm going to open up my towel a little bit, place my stencil on there, and I'm going to remove that Post-it tape. And I'm going to spray my stencil with that same rubbing alcohol and then wipe that all away. You could just take it over to your sink to wash it off, but I find this to be nice and quick, especially since I want to use it again right away. And with the rubbing alcohol, I don't have hardly any dry time. There is another card design that I'm going to be doing, and that first one I created, which I will show later on, I didn't do a stencil background, but I thought since I had my stencil out, I wanted to see how this would look with the tone-on-tone. So in this case, I'm using a light blue cardstock, which is Raindrop from Spellbinders, and a color that I found to be just a shade darker in my inks was Powder Blue from Gina K Designs. So really all I did was go through all of my swatch books that I create of the inks and cardstock that I have on hand, and that is how I kind of line up and choose my colors. So I'm using the blending brush once again with that center area masked off with the Post-it tape, and I'm going over the open areas of the stencil, and I think this was a really great match. Then here is a look at those two ink blended cardstock panels side by side, and I really love these two shades of blue. Now, initially, I was just going to have this piece be plain white. I wasn't going to add any stitching, but I decided to step it up just a little bit. So I brought in that other piece that's going to add the holes for the stitching and also the embossed lines in there. So I lined that up, held that down with Post-it tape, and I'm going to run this through my Platinum 6 die cut machine, and that's going to create the holes for me so I can do my stitching. Now that I have that die cut out, I'm going to prep my area to do some stitching, which means I have some of this thin Best Ever craft tape. I have this little tool that's going to help me thread my needle in case I struggle, because sometimes I do. And then I also have that shiny gold thread. So I'm ripping off a couple pieces of that thin Best Ever craft tape. I want to have those ready so when I'm done stitching or starting to stitch, I can tape my thread down. I have my needle threaded, and here is a close-up look. You can see we are going to be starting in that center point, and then there's kind of those etched lines to give you a guide on where to stitch. So I'm going to just push my needle through from the back, and I'm going to slowly and carefully pull this through. Now I have a really long piece because I want to get this all done in one shot. I don't want to have to rethread my needle. Now I'm taking that little tail and I'm going to tape it down with that Best Ever craft tape. Now, one thing I think is very helpful is I'm going to tape it down kind of in the direction I'm going to be starting my stitch. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So I have that taped down. Now I'm going to pull my thread, so I'm giving myself some room to start my stitching. I'm going to flip this over, and when I come through that hole, I am going to start in the direction that my tail is taped. That way it's kind of pulling in that same direction. So I'm going to kind of just tighten that up a little bit, and I will be using my thumb and forefinger a lot to hold that down. I want my stitches to be tight, but not so tight that it's going to bend my cardstock. So I'm going to come back through that center hole. I'm going to go to the next one over on that top arch, and I'm going to make sure down in that bottom center hole that I come through that I'm kind of pulled over, starting to go to the left. I don't want my thread to overlap in different directions. And you'll see at the finished end, or when I bring a close-up of it finished, you'll see what I mean on how all of the threads, all of the threads are pulled in the direction that they're supposed to be and not overlapping in different directions. To me, it's kind of something that you almost have to experience to understand when I mean pulling your thread in the direction that you're stitching. If you're not familiar with stitching, the first time I had done it, my thread wasn't lined up really good, and it was still fine. It would be perfectly fine for a card. But once I kind of figured out how to maneuver and pull my thread over, it just stepped it up a lot better, and I was a lot more satisfied with my stitching. So I'm going to finish this up till I go all the way around, and I did have enough thread on here so I didn't have to stop and restart. And then what I'm going to do is flip it over, and I'm going to tape my end. So that's why I had that tape ready. I don't have to stop and tear any apart. And I also want to make sure when I'm taping it, I don't tape it over any of the open holes. So here now I bring that close up, and you can see where all of my threads are nice and fanned out and not overlapping each other. It looks to me like a sunburst. Now I have these other two pieces that's going to create kind of this kaleidoscope look behind our white piece. And I die cut them out of some raindrop cardstock and glacier cardstock. I'm going to take my Connect glue that I have in a fine tip bottle, and I'm adding dots of glue kind of to the center and the very top point of that. Then I'm going to place this down. Now this is in the back, so this is behind my piece. And I'll just line those tips up. That's where you want to line everything up. This one's a little hard because it's a light blue, but once we put this on our dark background, it's really going to stand out and just adds a nice subtle touch. So I did the same thing to the other side. You need to cut two pieces for one of your white main focal points. And I lined it up next to each other, so I'm going to have one hanging off the ends. That was better to me than having it bunched up kind of in the middle, overlapping each other. And then I can just trim that little piece off. I'll repeat those steps for my next piece. So this last layer that I'm adding is out of the light blue cardstock, the glacier cardstock. And this one, you can see the openings are getting smaller. So it's going to layer up beautifully behind all of these points. So once again, once I line that up, I have a little piece hanging off that I'm just going to trim off with my scissors. And then once I bring this up close, you can see how it just layers together beautifully with those light colors. Now this next part, I went ahead and die cut all of my flower pieces off screen. For this, I'm using a few different colors of cardstock from Spellbinders. I have the leaves and the stems die cut from rainforest cardstock, that's the light green. Some of the flowers are going to be in raindrop for the backer piece there. The front piece on the flower, so that's a layered flower, has glacier. Then I have beeswax for the center of my flowers. And I also brought in phone booth and crimson to do some layering for my flowers. Now, you don't have to do two different colors of cardstock, but I think it's a great way to go through your scraps and just figure out what two colors would look good together there. For the sentiment, I'm die cutting out the banner first from white cardstock, and then I'm lining up a sentiment in the center of that banner, and I'm going to die cut this out of some brushed gold cardstock from Spellbinders. So that's going to give me that brushed gold on top, and what I'll do is layer these two pieces together. This is one of my favorite things to do, is just add another cardstock layer, whether it be behind flowers or sentiments, just to help give it a little bit more stability. I'll go ahead and add this to my banner there. So I'm going to add some more of that liquid glue. I can place my sentiment banner over the top, and now I can start doing my floral arrangement. So here's a little secret about me. I am awful at floral arrangements. I really do struggle. So when I saw Kim's examples, I thought that was super helpful. Spellbinders is so great at arranging their small floral images. And what I really wanted to do is color inspiration. So I tweaked it a little bit, kind of added my own colors and maybe changed up a couple things. But really, I wanted to focus on the colors. So for me, in this color scheme, it can be a very kind of country type of look if you look at it that way. Or I did use the red, white, and blue colors. So you could send this to a veteran if you wanted to send a happy birthday card. You could do some 4th of July cards. There's a couple different ways you can use this color scheme. It doesn't always have to be patriotic, but it definitely can have that purpose too. So now for my piece with the stitching on it, I added some thin foam squares behind that. And then I'm going to place this over my open area there down at the bottom. So I just lined that up so my sentiment was centered. That will finish off my first card here for you, and then I'm going to start working on the second card design. So for this one, I am taking that stitching portion and I'm lining them both up together, so it's going to have those stitching openings and lines. And I die cut that from that Cosmic Sky cardstock once again. Now I am speeding through the stitching because I just repeated exactly what I showed earlier using that same shiny gold thread, and I'm going to stitch both panels. So as I finish up the stitching here, I can pull my thread in the back and tape that down, just making sure you're not going over the open areas of your die. So you don't want your yellow tape to be showing through the holes. So this gold thread looks just outstanding on that dark blue cardstock. So I repeated it on that second panel. I'm going to add that kind of kaleidoscope layer look, but I'm only using one of the layers, and I die cut that layer from the brushed gold cardstock once again. If you haven't checked out Spellbinders brushed gold or brushed cardstock in general, they are beautiful. So that is what I used. I thought it would tie in nicely with my gold thread. So just trimming off those little ends there that are overhanging. Now I can add some of that liquid glue to just one of the center portions, and I can layer these two together to be one piece. Once again, I did all my die cutting of the flowers off screen, and I just sped this up because it's literally just adding dabs of glue. I'm picking up a lot of the smaller pieces with my pick and stick tool from Gina K Designs. The other thing I find super helpful when dealing with small dies is I die cut out a bunch extra and I just put them in a little jar. So I figured out about what pieces I needed, especially to do these cards, but I keep those other pieces handy in case I misplace one or bump one. So those are always helpful to have. So my card design, once again, was inspired by Kim Kesty because she's just a master at getting these floral arrangements. So I want to have two clusters kind of in each corner. And what I do is I start with my centerpiece. I just kind of leave that there as a placeholder. I don't actually have that glued down yet. And then I started placing my flowers and my leaves in that corner. So I figure out what I want on top. And then what I do is add liquid glue and I start just attaching them. Mainly the leaves will typically be the first thing glued down because they are furthest in the back. And then just working my way up to the front. And I'll just repeat that for this little bouquet that's going to be in that top left corner. Once again, adding some liquid glue. And of course, I love my handy tweezers that will help pick up these small pieces and keep my hands out of the way so I can really get an idea of where everything is going. So this is another one of those color schemes. I just changed it up instead of being a dark blue background. This one is a lighter blue, so it could be really any occasion, but also would be great for patriotic. Now for my centerpiece, I'm adding thin foam squares once again to the back, and I'm going to place that in that open area of my front panel. A little tip if you're nervous about placing this down and not being quite sure if you're ready to commit to that placement is add liquid glue to those foam squares. That'll give you a little bit of wiggle room to kind of shift that around. Now a sentiment I did heat emboss off screen and die cut out with that banner die. And then I placed some foam squares over that center portion and added my sentiment over the top. Now here is a close-up look at that beautiful threading. I love that stitching detail and it's so easy to do. And then the beautiful arrangement of the florals on each corner. Now here is a card that I did originally kind of off screen as I was getting my ideas put together. And that one is the same design, but I didn't do the ink blending in the background. So two totally different looks. And then here is that first card that I created. I think this one might be my favorite, but it's because I really do love that dark blue. And you can see the one on the left has the stitching, the one on the right does not. So lots of great ideas here, and I just really wanted to share this color inspiration with you from the Let's Stamp Together kit. I really hope you enjoyed today's videos and the tips that I shared along the way. I want to thank you so much for joining me today and see you again real soon.